Hello everyone, good afternoon. They wanted to turn the lights on, but I said that Jews and Christians are so close these days that maybe we should have a more intimate setting. Dim the lights a little. It's really great to be here at the 4th Annual Israel Congress in Germany. My name is Reinstein. I'm the Director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Israel Allies Foundation, and we're honored to be co-sponsors in this event. We have an incredible panel with us this evening. I know a lot of these people for many years, and having one of them speak at your event is always a big pleasure, but to have all of them at the same time is really a treat that I haven't had a chance to experience. I just want to start by saying that there's a new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century. And when we started the Caucus in 2004, we realized that it was Christians who were standing up with Israel, not countries. And we saw that during the time of the Second Intifada, nation after nation was turning their back on Israel. Let there be light. But Christians were standing up with Israel. And we realized that the reason Christians were standing with Israel is because they were putting values and beliefs ahead of economic and political concerns. Because both Jews and Christians understand that values and beliefs, in the end, are what's important. Unfortunately, here in Europe today, we're seeing an incredible double standard against Israel, an attempt to appease radical Islam. And therefore, they have taken all values, beliefs, friendship, support of a fellow democracy out of context, and instead are trying to impose their will on the Israeli people. But we see that Christians once again are standing up with Israel, and because of that, Israel and Jews around the world are standing up with Christians. And so I think this panel is very impressive and important at this time, because we're kind of in the fork of the road of history. We've started this new relationship and we see unprecedented activity between Jews and Christians. But the question is, where do we go from here? And I think we have a few people here that can answer that question. I'm going to start by asking everyone to give a 5-minute statement, and then I'm going to ask individual questions. For the statement, if you could come up to the podium, that'd be great, and then for the questions, you can answer it from the table. Our first speaker is a member of the Knesset. His name is Robert Ilatov. He's from the Israel Beitenu party. He's been in the Knesset for 4 terms. He's the head of the Israel Beitenu faction, and he's the chairman of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, which is a group of over 18 members of Knesset from 7 political parties that work together to forge direct lines of communication and cooperation and coordination with Christian leaders around the world. Please give a warm welcome to member of Knesset, Robert Ilatov.
Thank you, Josh. You almost said all what I want to say. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank to the organizers of this important event, and I would like to ask them to do the next event in German and Hebrew, because the reason is that it's German and Israel Congress, and in Israel we speak Hebrew. And the second, this is the religion panel, and a dialogue between Jews and Christians. And the important thing that the first Christian was a Jew and he speaks Hebrew. So it's very important to do it in Hebrew, because this is the real dialogue. And we speak English very well too, but I prefer to do it in Hebrew. The chairman of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, we are working to create and maintain relationship between the Israel and parliaments all over the world, and our Christian allies with all our friends. My colleagues and I at the Knesset are always overjoyed to welcome our Christian allies from around the world to visit us and experience the miracle of the modern Jewish state. Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, the only way to assure that freedom of religion is granted to people of all faiths, it is to allow Israel to maintain its sovereignty of Jerusalem and all of her holy sites. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East where all of its citizens are created equally, regardless of ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and political beliefs. The Christians all around the world are being murdered in the place as Nigeria and in Syria. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that protects the lives of Christians, from the Christian citizens living in Israel to Christian refugees escaping persecution. Ironically, even for Muslims, Israel is the most protected place in the Middle East. While Israel prides itself on maintaining freedom of religion for all of its citizens, just a few kilometers away, under the rule of the Palestinian Authority, Christians live in fear of their lives and are persecuted on a regular basis. We are enthused about the strong relationships we have developed with policy makers around the world through the sister Caucus that exists in 35 parliaments around Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the Americas. We are so grateful for the strong support we receive from our faith leaders and the grassroots supporters in churches around the globe, particularly here in Germany from our partners at the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, to our friends, Pastor Jobst Bittner and his contribution to Israel advocacy through the Holocaust remembrance. Thank you.
I'd like to call up Rabbi Lipman. He's a former member of Knesset from the Yesh Tea Party. He works today as the head of public diplomacy for the World Zionist Organization. And just to let you know that when Lipman was a member of Knesset, and he will be once again, I believe, he was very active in the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, but also just in interfaith in general. And I think his perspective was a huge blessing to the relationship, and he helped to grow it in the Knesset and now outside of the Knesset. So please welcome former member of Knesset, Rabbi Lipman.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to start my words by doing something which I think is only appropriate given the topic. You know, we're here sitting in Frankfurt having this day about celebrating the Israel-German relationship, and it bothers me sometimes when we have these kinds of days, and at least until this point, I have not heard God mentioned in any of the sessions. And I think that for us to talk about Israel, to talk about Israel's story, to talk about the relationship between Germany and Israel, to talk about the remarkable change around that's happened in 71 years, and not to bring God into the picture, is a terrible, terrible mistake. And therefore, I'll simply begin by saying that we give thanks, all of us together, to God for bringing us to this day and for allowing us to see the fulfillment of His great prophecies and miracles happening on a daily basis in the state of Israel. When we talk about the relationship between Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Israel, on the one hand, we can say that Israel is a state which provides freedom of worship to all faiths, and we can be very proud of that. We can talk about the fact that Jews and Christians have been able to put aside centuries of a horrific relationship and move forward, and we can be very proud of that. But since it's a panel, and in a panel there should be some level of controversy, I'm going to present what I think we have to work on to strengthen these relationships, and I believe that all three groups that I mentioned have things that they can work on. I'll start with my faith, the Jewish faith, for a moment. I will never forget the moment I was sitting in the Knesset on the day of the inauguration, and it came time for the Hatikva to be sung, the national anthem. And the Arab members of Knesset walked out. And I was very angry how they walk out. And one Arab member stayed in. His name is Asawi Fresh from the Meretz Party. He's in a party with Jews. And he stayed in. And I went over to him afterwards and I asked him, tell me what this is all about. And he said to me, it's the first time I ever thought about it from this perspective. He said, what do you think it feels like to be a Muslim or someone from a different faith? And the national anthem of your country talks about 2,000 years of Jewish aspirations for this land. That's why it's hard for them. I'm not suggesting that we change our national anthem. But a switch went off in my head. And I realized that we, as Jews in a Jewish state, and we can be proud that we provide free rights and equality to everyone, but we have to go so out of our way to make sure that other faiths feel comfortable. If an incident happens where there's an attack on a Christian site, it can't just be business as usual. We have to go so out of our way to make sure that they realize that there are extremists, but the country is with them. And the same thing if something happens, an attack towards Muslims. We have to go out of our way to make sure that equality is not just equality, it's almost going overboard to make sure that they feel completely comfortable. And that's our challenge on the Jewish side, to make sure that every single faith feels comfortable in Israel. On the Muslim side, there's no doubt that the average person in the state of Israel assumes that because we've had wars for decades with our Arab neighbors and even from within, so there's an automatic suspicion and a fear in terms of security. Now, I've met Muslims throughout Israel who would rather live in Israel than any other country in the Middle East by far, and they say that they have rights there, they have the ability to have a future there, as opposed to every other state in the region. But those voices are very quiet. And because those voices are very quiet, and all the voices that we hear are the extremist voices, it's much more difficult for those in the Jewish state to be completely accepting of the Arab population as well. And therefore, the challenge, in my opinion, to the moderate Muslims in Israel is that their voices be heard. And I know it's difficult, I know there are fears, but if we want to create a better relationship between the Jews and the Muslims, we have to hear those moderate voices. And finally, to the Christians. I agree with everything that's been said about the incredible relationship. In my time in the Knesset, there was no greater friend around the world than our Christian brothers and sisters in almost every continent that I had exposure to. There still is a fear in Israel, and I say this before every Christian group, that Christians, when they come to Israel, perhaps there's some kind of intention in terms of proselytizing and missionary work. And the average Israeli, they have that fear. I don't have that fear so much. I grew up in the United States of America. Before I moved to Israel, my friends on my block were all Christians. We were buddies. We played ball together. I never felt a moment of suspicion or fear. But in Israel, that exists. And therefore, the challenge for the Christian community, as they express this incredible support for Israel, is to make it very, very clear that this is out of a love for the Jewish people, it's out of a love for the Holy Land, it's out of an appreciation for the prophecies that are coming true, and without any intention whatsoever of trying to come in and proselytize and missionize towards the Jewish people. If all three groups can find a way to strengthen themselves in these areas, I think we'll take the platform that we've already started of Israel being the Holy Land for all faiths, and we'll take it to the next step, and we'll see even greater prophecies, God willing, come true. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those kind remarks. For those of you who are standing, there are plenty of seats here. Please come on in, fill in the seats. We want to welcome everyone here. All these seats are open, so please come on and have a seat. Our next speaker is Rabbi Julien Soussan. He is the community rabbi of Frankfurt, which is the third largest Jewish community in Germany, formerly of Dusseldorf. And he's been very much involved in not just being involved with the Jewish community, but speaking as a liaison to other communities and representing the Jewish community here in such a proud way. So please welcome Rabbi Soussan.
Thank you very much. Good evening almost. I'll try to speak in English, but it's very difficult to talk after Rabbi Lipman, and I definitely had to change some things I wanted to say. But I guess to make sure that it's worth to have two rabbis on a panel, there's a different perspective, of course. I want to rather talk about the German situation for Jews here, and especially in a Jewish-Christian dialogue. At the same time, being a Jew in Germany always means that somehow you're a speaker for Israel, willing or not willing. I was once asked by an interviewer, what do you think about the settlements in Israel? And I looked at him and said, why are you asking me? I said, well, you are, I said, I'm a German citizen, I can't even vote in Israel. I don't have really influence on that. If you ask me because I'm Jewish and because I have family in Israel and because I've got, of course, an opinion which is not only influenced by German media, then it's a fair question. And I definitely have an opinion. But to ask me only because I'm Jewish doesn't make sense. So, of course, we know the German Jewish story, which is again and again, and one thing you didn't mention, I was also rabbi of Mainz, Magenza, which is one of the oldest Jewish settlements in Germany, one of the Schum-Städte, Speyer, Maisa and Magenza. And I used to do, tours in the synagogue for people coming from all over the world, coming to Mainz, so the only thing to see is the dome on one side and the synagogue, the new one. And so talk about Judaism, you have 1 hour, and talk about everything. It's very difficult. So I talked about the Jewish history in Mainz. I talked about Judaism and, of course, the beautiful synagogue they had. So to shorten it up, I summarized the Jewish history of Mainz in 5 minutes. I said Jews lived here in very good terms with the Christian population for over 40 years, starting in the 10th century or even before. And then there was a pogrom, this time initiated by the bishop. And then 10 years later they came back and they lived in very good relationship with the Christian society. And they built up all the Jewish welfare again. And then after 35 years this time, there was a pogrom initiated by the mayor. And you can continue that for 400 years. And then you have a break of another 200 years when there were no Jews in Mainz. And then they came back, and of course we all know how it ended in the Shoah. So I thought to myself, how can that be? How did the Jews ever come back? I mean, I see it now in the perspective to 1,000 years ago, but of course those people didn't have really a choice. And they hoped for each time that every signature they would have by the Fürst, by the Duke or whoever would give them, assure them that this time it's different, this time we're going to stand at your side and you have protection, my personal protection. Didn't really help. And so I feel strange somehow being a rabbi in Germany. I feel strange because I live now in 70 years after the Shoah in a very special moment. We see a definite change in behaviorism. In behavior, Nostra Aetate 50 years ago changed the whole view of the church, the Catholic Church, in regards of Judaism. I was a member in a discussion group in the Church of Rheinland, where they already 40 years ago wrote that the existence of the state of Israel is the proof that God is existing and is taking part in this world. They themselves said that. And of course we live after, in the shadows of the Shoah, in a change of understanding of how relationship between Christians and Jews have to be in the future. And still, there is a fear left. There's a fear left that something might change again. And so we are very suspicious for everything coming up, especially in Germany, but mostly now in Europe. I used to talk to German classes, And I said, you should be proud. It's very strange to be a proud German. I think you should be proud. You should be proud that in this country we tried to learn from the past, from the history. We tried to change, and we did a lot of change. I feel myself today, or at least let's say 20 years ago, in Germany, as in one of Europe's states, which is the most secure for Jews in Europe. This is something which I fear is changing. And as Rabbi Lipman said, we are a religious panel. I want to maybe insert here a little thought, not to stress my 5 minutes over too much, but there is an interesting coincidence, at least in Galut, where we read usually the parasha of Bamidbar, the 4th book of Moses, always before the festival of Shavuot. We get the 10 Commandments, and we get the 10 Commandments, and everything is ready. The 4th book is starting with the troops being surrounding the Ohel Moed, the Holy of Holies, and then now we shall go to Israel. And we all know, I guess, the 4th book of Moses, and we know we don't arrive there. The whole Torah is always the aspiration of coming into Israel. Never happens. It only happens in Yoshua, the book afterwards. And Bamidbar always reminds us, we are ready, now we have the opportunity, now we can go, now let's go together. Everybody in his place. We are all different, that's fine. But we have a goal together. We have a goal together, not only Jews, people all over the world, which of course is peace, and of course we all have this in common. But now we have a different situation. And just to give you 3 thoughts on that to finish my first thoughts. First is, we have new coming back anti-Semitism in Germany, which is an anti-Semitism driven by law. After all those years, Germans had to feel bad about what has happened to Jews. Suddenly comes something back, which is, but you yourself, you do things that are not so great. What is typical? Slaughtering, circumcision. Will always come back. It's an issue that will prove, and in Germany, you remember 3 years ago, when a lawsuit said that this is barbaric, unfortunately some Germans took that as an opportunity to revive their old anti-Semitic prejudice. Jews, children, blood, remember that from the Middle Ages. And I don't say that all of them who were against circumcision or still are automatically anti-Semites. Of course not, but it went very fast in that direction. I got a lot of emails telling me, if you're not happy with our laws, go back to your country. Which I always answer, Schwarzwald? That's where I come from, Black Forest. The second is, of course, is an anti-Semitism which is disguised as anti-Semitism against Israel. As the Jew have always been the pariah all over the world, nowadays is Israel. And we hear a lot, we heard already, Israel is the only democratic state in the whole region. And the third, of course, which is really scaring us today, is the anti-Semitism brought in with some of the immigrants from Muslim background, the Islamists who come here, brought up in a self-understanding that Jews are the bad guys, and we have to stand together. Today, the world is changing. Christians, as much as Jews, are persecuted in many Muslim countries. Muslims are persecuted in many Muslim countries. It's time to stand up together, to fight for peace in a peaceful way. With God's help, we shall be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Our next speaker is Harald Eckert. He is the chairman of the Christians for Israel German branch. He's the former chairman of the international branch of Christians for Israel. He's a scholar, an author, a spiritual leader, And of everyone here, I've probably known Harald the longest, probably 12 years now. He was a pioneer in reaching out to Israel when it wasn't such a popular idea for Christian leaders. So I'm very honored to welcome Harald.
Thank you very much. A question in German. Wer versteht nicht hinreichend Englisch, um das hier zu folgen? Verstehen alle Englisch gut genug oder hat jemand ein Problem?
So this is a question to
Ja,
the German
ein Problem,
speakers,
kann man kurz
whether
die Hand-
everybody understands enough English.
Ja, das sind doch wenige genug und bitte schon Verständnis, ich mache auch in Englisch weiter, ist doch zu überwältigend hier die Mehrheit, die Englisch versteht. So I think for time's sake I continue in English. Most understand. Well, I'm very happy about this congress. I'm very happy about this panel. I think it's a great opportunity to share views and share perspectives from a Jewish and from a Christian perspective. Now it's my turn to be the first one to speak from a Christian perspective. And already I've been enriched by your contributions. Well, starting from a Christian perspective, I decide to start with our century-old history of antagonism. 1800 years roundabout of Christian anti-Judaism, 1800 years of Christian anti-Semitism is a long and a very dark and very hurtful history. And I still feel it is our obligation and our command as Christians to educate our own constituency about this history. I know for the Jewish side it's part of collective history and much deeper than any of us non-Jewish people are able to understand and to comprehend. On the Christian side it's still very vague knowledge to many except for the specialists. The specialists know, but the general churchgoer, most of them are not aware of the depth and the dimension of that cruel and shameful history from a Christian point of view. So I think that's still part of our obligation. That's my first statement. Well then, looking back to history, since 71 years, since World War II, things have changed and are in the process of changing dramatically. And I'm the first one to acknowledge that. And Nostra Aetate has been mentioned. So that's been a pivotal point of change for global Christian perspective, and also received and appreciated from the Jewish side in a growing way. And one of the things I've brought with me is an Orthodox rabbinic statement on Christianity from December 2015, December of last year. 50 years after Nostra Aetate, there is a kind of a statement. I know not everybody agrees to it. It's an inner Jewish and inner Orthodox debate on the value of that document. I'm aware of that, but still from a Christian point of view, they take a little bit of freedom here, because I think I may. From a Christian point of view, from an evangelical point of view especially, I was tremendously grateful for that kind of a statement. I think it is an enhancement, a step forward in Jewish-Christian dialogue and Jewish-Christian relations. I want to acknowledge and appreciate that. So looking back over the last 70 years, what did we have in Christian-Jewish relations? Well, we had repentance, and Nostra Aetate was a global expression of repentance from the Christian side. We had steps of reconciliation. We are still in the middle of that process of growing reconciliation. And then we had the dialogue, the Jewish-Christian dialogue. Very, very important. And in that dimension, in that systematic consequence, a very new thing. We always had good-willing people on both sides that had personal interaction and dialogue all those 1800 years. But on a systematic way and on a structured way with some of the great pioneers, it's been new. It's been after Auschwitz. It's been after Holocaust. And I want to acknowledge that as well. Now, as for today, 70 years after the Holocaust, 50 years after diplomatic relations between Germany and Israel, and on the basis of the process that went ahead, the basis of repentance, the basis of reconciliation, the basis of dialogue, where are we at? And I think the theme of the panel says it very well. It's time to move on from dialogue to cooperation. From dialogue to cooperation. And I want to add something that is very important to me. From dialogue to cooperation with Israel in the center. Not excluding Israel. Not excluding that which some perceive as being too controversial or too mundane, but with Israel in the center. That's why I'm so grateful for this Congress, because Israel is in the center of our political, cultural, economic, and also our religious dialogue. And I applaud that. Well, if we talk about dialogue and cooperation, about this progress, I want to suggest a few topics to be included in that process from dialogue to cooperation. Now I'm getting a little more personal and I'm getting a little more controversial, probably. But I think this is a time the introduction has been accordingly. Number one, I would suggest that, especially from a religious point of view and from a religious alliance, we take the Judeo-Christian values much more into the center of attention. We take the biblical values much more into the center of dialogue and cooperation. And this is something I want to advocate for. What do I mean by biblical, by Judeo-Christian values? For German-Israeli dialogue, Christian-Jewish dialogue, also in the European context, something that's almost gone lost, I think needs to be revived. It needs to be part of the public debate and of our process. I want to remind ourselves that what we have in the Constitution, the talk about the dignity of man, comes from the Bible. It comes from creation. It's because man is created in the image of God that we receive a unique dignity that's different to all of creation outside of man. So I want to remind ourselves that this is something that should become very central in our awareness, in our acknowledgement, in our dialogue, in our cooperation. The Ten Commandments, biblical values, the Ten Commandments. I want to advocate that we need to take that very serious, especially in some of the debates, the current debates that we have on the public level, on which basis integration, on which basis dialogue and cooperation. I think this must get more central, must get revived. And then the third one, which may be the most controversial, and it would be interesting to see how much common ground we do have here, is also to take biblical prophecy very serious. And I'm very happy, and I want to confirm and reiterate what has been mentioned about the church in Rhineland, that the rebirth of the state of Israel is regarded as a sign of the faithfulness of God and the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And I'm connecting with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who makes it to a habit that at the United Nations General Assembly he closes his speech in the General Assembly by quoting the prophet, one of the prophets. I want to connect with this kind of mentality. So this is Judeo-Christian values, biblical values. And the second of three, I want to, as I said, bring Israel in the center of our cooperation and move from commemoration, which we have developed a culture, a very valuable and a very productive culture of commemoration, and I'm very proud and grateful for it, from commemoration to solidarity. And this is where we have a battle. Not all of those who are very active in commemoration are as active in solidarity to the Jewish people in general and to Israel in specific. But the broader this gap goes, the more I have the concern that commemoration will get hypocritic, not real. So I want to make that remark, and then I come to my final remark. It is my desire, and it is my thrive and the motivation for my involvement in Jewish-Christian, not only dialogue, but cooperation as an evangelical Christian, that our growing consensus as Bible-believing Jews and Bible-believing Christians, if I want to term it this way, will get more and more influence and access into German-Israel relations. And we will find our part in that portfolio, together with the businessmen, together with the politicians, together with the cultural people and everybody else, the educational people. We find our place, a rightful place, in the middle of the process, in the middle of the development. I think it will be for the benefit for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harald, for those warm words. I'd like to introduce our final speaker before we open it up to questions. His name is Jobst Bittner, and him and his lovely wife Charlotte have been instrumental in starting two important organizations. One is TOS, and the other one is called the March of Life. And the March of Life, I've had the privilege of being a part of it, as well as Robert Ilatov and other members of the Knesset. is an incredible initiative that brings Christians out in the thousands in cities all across Europe to march, not to remember the stories of the Holocaust, but to repent for them and to publicly repent for them. And it's been a real honor partnering with the March of Life, and Jobst is an incredible pastor, spiritual leader, theologian. So please give him a warm welcome, Jobst Bittner.
Ja, vielen Dank. Es ist eine große Freude, hier zu sein.
So thank you very much. It's a great joy to be here.
Erlauben Sie mir, dass ich auf Deutsch weitermache, damit ich mich selbst verstehe.
Please do permit me to continue in German so I can understand myself.
So, ich komme gerade aus Krakau, wo wir ein Decke des Schweigens-Seminar durchgeführt haben.
I have just returned from Krakow where we had a Veil of Silence seminar.
Und das haben wir in der Zusammenarbeit mit dem katholischen Bischof Ries durchgeführt.
And we have organized it in cooperation with the Catholic Bishop Rich.
So, und das Thema war die transgenerationale Weitergabe des Holocaust in den Generationen.
And the topic was the transgenerational passing on of the Holocaust.
So 70 Jahre nach dem Holocaust ist bis heute eben immer noch eine Verantwortung, die wir tragen.
So 70 years after the Shoah today, there is still a responsibility that we carry.
Und aus dieser Verantwortung entstand der Marsch des Lebens.
And this responsibility birthed the March of Life.
Der steht dafür, dass wir erinnern, versöhnen und dann ein Zeichen setzen gegen Antisemitismus.
And it stands for remembering, reconciling and making a statement for Israel.
Und wir hatten das Vorrecht, in über 350 Städten unterwegs zu sein.
And we have had the privilege of being on the streets in more than 350 cities.
Und wie Sie gerade gehört haben, ist ein wichtiges Zeichen, dass wir als Nachfahren der Tätergeneration um Vergebung bitten und versuchen, Worte zu finden, die die Väter nicht gefunden haben.
And as you've heard just now, one of the big marks of the March of Life is asking forgiveness and finding the words that our fathers never found.
Als ich vor einigen Wochen in Los Angeles war und dort den Rabbi Cooper kennenlernte, er ist der Vize-Präsident des Simon Wiesenthal Centers.
So when I was in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, I met Rabbi Cooper there, and he is the deputy chairman of the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Er sagte, das ist ungewöhnlich, sowas habe ich von Kirchen und Gemeinden noch nie gehört.
He said, this is unusual. I've never heard any church or congregation do something like that.
Warum machen Sie das als Pastoren? Warum machen Sie das zusammen mit anderen Kirchen und Gemeinden?
Why are you doing this as a pastor in cooperation with other churches?
Und wenn man in unser Internet hineinschaut, da findet man etwas, nämlich die Werte von dem Marsch des Lebens.
And if you take a look at our website, you'll find the values of the March of Life.
Und da steht in die Zusammenarbeit und es steht etwas Wichtiges, keine Evangelisation.
It speaks about cooperation, and it's also a very important statement. It says no proselytizing.
Und das ist schon erstaunlich, dass man das hinschreibt und hinschreiben muss.
And it's actually quite amazing to write this down or even to have to write it down.
Und da sind wir an einem ganz entscheidenden Punkt, wenn es um den Dialog geht.
And this is a very crucial point to the dialogue.
So, ich bin der Pastor einer evangelikalen Gemeinde
So I'm pastor of an evangelical church,
und als christlicher Vertreter ist natürlich das Weitersagen des Evangeliums, der guten Botschaft, gehört zum Selbstverständnis des christlichen Glaubens.
and of course, as a Christian pastor, it is taken for granted to share the good news, the gospel.
Und gleichzeitig aber, wie kann man diese beiden Dinge verbinden?
But at the same time, how can we combine these two aspects?
Ich hatte von Krakau berichtet und da gab es zwei bemerkenswerte Ereignisse.
I had told you about Krakow, and there were two very remarkable events.
So, der Bischof Ries, er ist der Nachfolger von Karol Wojtyla, das heißt, das ist die Stelle, an der er auch tätig war.
So Bishop Rich, he is the he followed after Karol Wojtyla, and he's ministering at the same place that he was ministering in.
Und er erzählte von einem einschneidenden Ereignis, das er in der Gedenkstätte Auschwitz hatte.
And he shared a very decisive event or thing that happened to him when he visited the memorial of Auschwitz.
Er war da mit anderen Pfarrern und Priestern zusammen.
He was together with other ministers, with priests.
Und man kann dort am Eingang, von oben kann man die Gedenkstätte Auschwitz sehen.
And right there at the entrance from above, you can see the memorial of Auschwitz.
Und dann sagte er zu den anderen Priestern, wir alle haben das hier aufgebaut.
And then he turned to the other priests around him and he said, we were the ones who built this whole thing.
Und dann erzählte er weiter, wie seine Priesterkollegen mit Unverständnis reagierten.
And then he shared that his colleagues, his priests, they looked at him completely not understanding.
Und was er damit meinte, war die historische Verantwortung der Christen für den Holocaust.
But what he was talking about was the historic responsibilities of Christians for the Holocaust.
Und an dieser Verantwortung muss sich jeder Dialog und jede Kooperation messen.
And any dialogue, any cooperation has to be measured according to this responsibility.
Auf dieser Konferenz gab es ein israelisches Ehepaar, die kamen per Zufall dorthin.
And at that conference there was an Israeli couple who had, by coincidence, happened upon the conference.
So, der Mann war Child Survivor, er war Überlebender.
The husband was a child survivor.
Und 1944 in Vilnius geboren, war Kind von Partisanen.
In 1944, born in Vilnius, he was a child of partisans.
Und sie hörten zum ersten Mal, dass die Teilnehmer über die Schuldverstrickung ihrer Familie gesprochen haben.
And for the very first time, they heard that participants of the conference actually spoke about the guilt their own families had incurred.
Und er sagte, bitte hört niemals damit auf. Er war tief bewegt von dem, was er hört.
And they said, please never stop doing this. And he was deeply moved by what he had heard.
So, ich bin Pastor einer evangelikalen Gemeinde,
So I'm a pastor of an evangelical church,
aber ich bin auch Pastor einer Gemeinde mit der Verantwortung vor der Geschichte.
but I'm also a pastor of a church with a responsibility in the face of history.
Und das Evangelium ist ein Evangelium der Versöhnung.
And the gospel is a gospel of reconciliation.
Und dieses Evangelium kann nur angesichts des Schweigens der Kirche gegenüber dem Holocaust in Verantwortung vor der Vergangenheit gelebt werden.
And we can only live this gospel in responsibility when facing the truth about the past.
So, in Tübingen gab es einen bekannten Theologen, Edward Jüngel,
There was a very famous theologian in Tübingen, Eduard Jüngel,
und er sagt Folgendes auf einer Synode der EKD.
and he, at a synod of the Lutheran Church in Germany, he said,
Er sagte, nachdem die Kirche in Deutschland, als es bitter nötig war, nicht für Juden geschrieben hat,
after the church did not speak up for the Jews at a time when it had been so necessary,
wird es jetzt dafür Zeit, und ich verkürze das Zitat, dass sie das leben, was sie vorher nicht getan haben.
it is now just about time, and I'm shortening the quote, that they live now what they didn't do before.
In einer Stellungnahme der EKD wurde Folgendes gesagt.
And then in a statement, the Lutheran Church said the following.
Angesichts der schuldbeladenen Geschichte der Kirche im Verhältnis zum Judentum
In the face of the guilt-ridden history of the church towards Judaism,
muss ganz neu darüber nachgedacht werden, wie die Versöhnung des Evangeliums weitergegeben wird.
we have to think completely afresh how the reconciliation message of the gospel can be shared.
So, ich würde es ganz anders formulieren.
I would actually put it in completely different terms.
Angesichts der schuldbeladenen Geschichte der Kirche
In the face of the guilt of church history,
geschieht eben das Leben des Evangeliums, das Zeugnis des christlichen Evangeliums,
the life of the gospel or the witness of the Christian gospel
geschieht nicht zuerst durch das Wort,
cannot first of all happen in words,
sondern durch aktives, versöhnendes Handeln,
but through acts of reconciliation,
durch das Erinnern,
through remembering,
durch die Bitte um das Vergebung
through the request for forgiveness,
und durch das Stimmeerheben für Israel und gegen Antisemitismus.
and through raising our voice for Israel and against
Und
anti-Semitism.
daraus möchte ich eine These zum Schluss formulieren.
And in closing, I would like to sharpen this to a thesis.
Jeder Dialog und Kooperation
Any dialogue and cooperation
muss sich von Seiten der Kirche daran messen lassen,
has to be measured on the part of the church
ob und inwieweit der Holocaust authentisch aufgearbeitet wurde
whether and in how far the Holocaust is worked through authentically,
und die einzigartige Stellung Israels in der Heilsgeschichte
and whether Israel's unique place in God's salvation story, in
Als-
redemptive history,
als so hat das Papst Johannes Paul II. Gesagt, als unsere älteren Brüder,
this is as John Paul II, the Pope, put it, as our elder brothers,
oder Papst Benedikt sagte, als die Väter im Glauben
or as Pope Benedict said it, the fathers in the faith,
anerkannt werden.
whether we recognize that.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to ask all the people who are standing there to come now fill up the seats. There are seats here, there are seats in behind here. You don't need to stand. We have plenty of room. That ends the opening statement part. Now we're going to move to the question part where we'll be asking questions to each of our panelists based on their opening statement, and they'll have 3 to 5 minutes to answer those questions. I just want to say before that this conference is taking place under a shadow of anti-Israel sentiment that we're seeing in Western Europe. Tomorrow, the foreign ministers of European countries will gather to try to pressure Israel once again into accepting a very damaging Paris so-called peace initiative that takes away all of the pre-designed agreements of direct negotiations and forces on Israel a decision to basically do something that's against its own self-determination. This is just one in a series of anti-Israel moves that we're seeing. 2 weeks ago, France adopted a UN UNESCO resolution that was devoid of all common sense, saying that the Temple Mount has no connection to Judaism or Christianity. It's a Muslim heritage site. That's what Western Europe, despite all the archaeological evidence, despite the Bible, despite all the written historic documentation, is saying. This precedes 2 months earlier, when Europe illegally embraced a labeling of goods from only Jewish areas of Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, against the law, against the World Trade Organization's legal parameters, despite the fact that there are over 200 land disputes in the world. And we are seeing this happening in Europe because they believe by feeding Israel to the crocodile, they'll be eaten last. And we saw this in World War II as well. But we know how that ends up. And I believe that this conference is our answer to those initiatives. People of faith, both Jews and Christians, have a duty to stand up and tell the truth. And so as far as I'm concerned, this panel is the most important of this conference. This is when people of faith understand the message and goes out and spreads it to the other people, because the citizens of Europe will not be fooled for long. And in that vein, I want to ask my question to member of Knesset, Robert Ilatov. Why? How can it be explained that in the only place in the Middle East where there's freedom and democracy, in the only place in the Middle East where the number of Christians actually grow as a population instead of decrease, of all of the Middle East countries, why is Europe's whole foreign policy and angst directed against their only friend in the West, in Israel? Where is it coming from?
We don't know why, and we can't explain, and we don't understand why our friends in Western Europe creating double standards for Israel. You spoke about leveling and other things. And we don't understand why they are attacking Israel and don't do it with countries that don't protect human rights in Middle East and don't protect the freedom of religion in Middle East. And we think it's the historic anti-Semitism that is very deep, that have very deep roots here in Europe, and now we see it. I think this is the explanation. We don't understand, we don't have any explanation.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to switch gears and go to Rabbi Dov Lipman. Rabbi Lipman, you come from a very unique perspective, coming from America and growing up as a minority with Christians. And now you're a leader in a Jewish state, and the Christians are the minority. How is it being on both sides? One, a minority in America, and then juxtaposed with being the majority with the Christian minority, and how does that affect your leadership?
So I often think about a scene that happened on our street growing up. We were playing ball together, and I went up to shoot the basketball, and my kippah fell off. And my Christian friend David, he walked over and he picked it up with such reverence, and he was almost shaking, and then he kissed it and he gave it back to me. And I think about that because if my Jewish friends would have picked it up, they wouldn't have done that. But it was my Christian friend who went so out of his way to show me respect and my religion respect. And that's what the image that I have in my head of you have to go so out of your way to show respect to the other when you are a majority. I grew up in the United States. I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism in the United States, but I never felt any anti-Semitism. I was never the recipient of anything negative because I was a Jew there. And I think that Israel, what I try to bring to Israel, the message I try to bring to Israel is that message. And it's not so simple, because Israel's a country where we're surrounded on all sides by people who want to destroy us. Israel's a country where, there was an amazing scene in a TV show that I actually probably know by heart, called The West Wing, where somebody said, what do you call a civilization where at any moment someone can blow themselves up in a pizza shop? And the person responded, Israel. Because we live in that kind of a pressure cooker, so you tend to sort of not reach out to others around you, and you tend to sort of come within yourselves. And I think that Israel's challenge right now is to realize, thank God we are strong. Thank God, no matter what challenges have come our way, with God's help, we've overcome them, and we'll do the same in the future. And we have to start focusing on some of these internal issues, which will define what does it mean to be a Jewish country. We haven't done that. We've been fighting for our survival for 68 years, and as a result, we've been focusing outward and not inward. And the process of developing a Jewish state, first and foremost, like the rabbi said, means that every person's created in God's image, that all human beings are God's children, and that even if we have different theological beliefs, we can absolutely get along with one another in perfect harmony. And that's actually the vision. Let's remember the temple, right, was a Beit Tfilah L'Kol Ha'amim. It was a place of worship for all nations. It was a Jewish temple that provided a framework for all faiths to reach out to God. And that's what the Jewish state ultimately has to be. The Jewish state has to be a place where we model to the world harmony amongst different people and different races and different beliefs. And that will enable the Jewish state internally to be what we call in Hebrew the Or LaGoyim, the light unto the nations, which shows the rest of the world the way it should be. So that's our challenge right now, is to start focusing inward, to work on breaking down those barriers, and to create that framework where we go so overboard in respecting people who have different faiths than we have.
Thank you, Rabbi Lipman. I'm going to excuse you and Robert now because I know that you have to catch a flight. I think so far this panel has been historic. We had 2 rabbis agree with each other, and we had 2 pastors agree with each other, and even more exciting, we had 2 members of Knesset from different parties agree with each other. So definitely on the right track. So thank you for your participation. Oh, you're going to stay for a little bit? Okay, you're okay? So Robert, we thank you for your participation. I'm going to go to the next question. Rabbi Soussan, there's a lot of talk in Israel that Germany has become the fastest growing Jewish community outside of Israel. And some see it with skepticism, some see it as a positive thing that's occurring. How do you see the growth of Judaism in Germany in the long term? Is there a future for Germany? And how do Christians who support Israel play into that future?
Okay. How long have I got? I'm wondering if I shouldn't speak German. I like the fact to be heard twice. Usually it's like, first of all, I think there's a special situation really. I grew up in a very small community in Germany, in Freiburg, in Breisgau, as I said, Black Forest. And my brother and I were at most the only young people in the community. We always joke, we said Last of Us switched off the light. in a few years. And suddenly we have this amazing growth of Judaism by the immigrants from former Soviet Union, and from official number of like 30,000 in the 70s of Jews in whole Germany. Now there is official members of communities, 120,000 in Germany, which of course means that there is even more higher number. And suddenly I was, when I turned rabbi 15 years ago or something, I was one of 8 rabbis in the rabbinic conference, which then was together the Orthodox rabbis together with the liberal rabbis in Germany. And today we have 2 conferences. In the Orthodox we have already 40 rabbis being rabbis of communities. There is still a lot of communities searching for rabbis. It's amazing. It's really, one of the celebrations, of course you have to imagine that many of the Russian Jews, as I shouldn't call them Russian-speaking Jews, they still celebrate the 9th of May, which is the Dien Pobedi, the day of victory for Russia over Germany. And so you bring the people in the community because you celebrate that. And there was this one veteran who spoke Yiddish to me, and he explained, look, if it wouldn't have been because of us, you wouldn't be here at all. There wouldn't be no Jews left in Germany at all. So I said, okay, I'm ready to celebrate with you, but only if we start with a prayer. That's what Rabbi said. We have to bring God in there somehow. And each time I see these people, it's like, Hitler, like so many others before him, and unfortunately also after him, who tried to annihilate the Jews. It's always like saying, but we won. We are still here. Maybe just a short thought. No, that goes too long. I want to say something about different. I grew up in Germany, and I was in 7th or 8th grade in my class, and we watched a movie about the Shoah, and something very strange happened to me. You imagine the only Jew in a class full of non-Jews, and you sit there then maybe 40 years after the Shoah, and we see these horrible pictures of KZs and so on, and I feel like very isolated. It's like, there's cameras, it's like spotting on you, and I look around in my class, and I'm trying to figure who of these guys would have been one of the killers, who would have sold me, who would have tried to get a better place in the Nazi party by betraying me, and who of all of my friends would really risk his life to protect me, to give me shelter, to, I don't know, give me a place to live in his whatever. And it was really a horrible moment for me, because I started to divide my friends, the pupils I lived with. I had 5 minutes ago we have been just normal young people, and suddenly we have been totally different worlds. And then Baruch Hashem, really for myself, for the sake of my health, happened something, which was, I thought to myself, be honest with yourself. If 40 years ago you wouldn't have been Jewish, you would have been just a plain German, how would you have reacted? Who would you have protected? What would you have done? And the true answer is, I wouldn't have known. I couldn't tell. Nobody could. But I was sure for one thing. If that would happen now today, to me, I would know what to do. And that's the message. The message is not guilt. The message is responsibility. The message is to know today we will never accept this happen again. And that's why. And that is what I meant before when I said we have to be proud Germans, because we in the whole Europe are still standing next to Israel. The Chancellor Merkel, I guess, is the most liked politicians in Europe in Israel. And we have to make sure that is not only a guilt reaction. Because there was Shoah, we as Germans have to protect Israel? No. Because we are believing people. We are believing maybe in Christianity or maybe in Judaism, but we are believing in peace and love, and that's why we have to protect the only state that really provides this for all its inhabitants. So that's why I think it's very important to have not only good relationship with each other, but we also have to be very supportive for Israel nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Our next question is to Harald Eckert. There were two major documents that came out recently, and you alluded to them in your opening remarks. One is an Orthodox rabbinical statement on Christianity. The other is a summary of a document on the Vatican's relations to Judaism. How will these two documents impact the new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century? And do you believe that these documents can also have an impact on relations between evangelical Christians and Catholics in Europe as well?
Well, this is a complex question that deserves a complex answer that I haven't time to give. Especially since most of you here in the room do not know those two documents. So what am I alluding to? Well, I can summarize a little bit. One of that is here. It's the Orthodox rabbinic statement on Christianity. I think you have a copy of the other one here. Basically what it says in a nutshell, that from an Orthodox point of view, not from a liberal or secular point of view, but from a Jewish Orthodox point of view, they have found words of appreciation for Christianity that I have not read and heard to that extent before. Basically saying what a positive contribution Christianity had to the nations of this world outside of Israel, and how much common ground we do have on certain issues, certainly not on Messiah, but on many other topics. So it was a very embracing, warm-hearted, and statement that sought common ground. And it was, on the one hand, I know it was a response connected to 50 years of Nostra Aetate, but I know it was also paying tribute to the Christians of many different backgrounds, also many Protestant backgrounds, the paying tribute to the solidarity of Christians from all around the world to the modern state of Israel and to the Jewish people in general. And so for me it was a milestone and a stepping stone for further discussion and further relationship on the basis of belief, on the basis of taking the Bible serious, on the basis of finding common ground in seeing how biblical values, how important they are as a central place of orientation for all around, and also seeing Israel as fulfillment of biblical prophecy, seeing Aliyah, Jews coming back from all around the world to Israel, as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and on that basis coming together closer than before. So that's number one. Number two is on the Catholic side of things. Also, it seems like this document is a further step forward on the grounds and on the basis of Nostra Aetate. And one of the things that have been mentioned in that Catholic statement is very similar to what Jobst Bittner has mentioned before, that there is a clear statement against aggressive missionalization or proselytization of Jews. And this is on the background of a heated discussion that has taken place over the last decades, over the last 3, 5, 7 years as well. And so I think that also strengthened a bridge of understanding that was not there before, and going further than Nostra Aetate went for finding common grounds and drawing together for a common future. So that's my assessment of both in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to our final question in this round, and then we'll have one more round of questions and final conclusion. Jobst Bittner has done a masterful job of running the March of Life in order to memorialize the victims of the Holocaust, to speak out against what was done in the Holocaust, to repent for the parents of the people today who took part in the Holocaust. But as we see with the rise of radical Islam, they're planning a new Holocaust. Mein Kampf is the #1 bestseller in the Muslim world. The official foreign policy of Iran is to wipe Israel off the map. What can March of Life do today and in the future years to come to stop the next Holocaust.
Ich glaube, dass die Grundlage vom Antisemitismus Gleichgültigkeit und Schweigen ist.
I believe the foundation of anti-Semitism is indifference and silence.
Ich möchte das nochmal unterstreichen. Um Verantwortung zu nehmen für die Zukunft, brauchen wir etwas, um diese Gleichgültigkeit und das Schweigen zu überwinden.
And I want to stress again that in order to take responsibility for the future, we need something to overcome this indifference and this silence.
Und das war so etwas wie ein Auslöser bei uns, als wir gemerkt haben, das Schweigen unserer Väter und Großväter in der Zeit des Nationalsozialismus hat sie zu Tätern gemacht.
And for us, this was something like a trigger when we realized that the silence of our grandfathers was something that made them perpetrators during the Nazi era.
So, man kann durch Passivität zum Täter werden.
And so by being passive, you can become a perpetrator.
Und diese Botschaft ist für uns in Kirchen, Gemeinden, auch in der Gesellschaft eine ganz wichtige Botschaft.
And for us in the churches and also in society as a whole, this is a very important message.
Das heißt, wenn wir heute zu Antisemitismus, zu Judenhass, zu doppelten Standards und all das, was der moderne Antisemitismus ausmacht, wiederum schweigen, können wir genauso wieder zu Tätern werden wie unsere Väter und Großväter zur Zeit des Nationalsozialismus.
So for us today, if we remain silent in the face of anti-Semitism, of double standards, of hatred against Jews, that can actually make us perpetrators just the same as our grandfathers and our fathers' silence made them perpetrators at that time.
Und was wir brauchen, ist eine gemeinsame Stimme von den Kirchen und Gemeinden, die ihre Stimme gegen den modernen Holocaust oder gegen den modernen Antisemitismus erheben.
And what we need today is a joint voice of the different churches and denominations to raise their voice together against anti-Semitism.
Aber daran muss man arbeiten, das passiert nicht automatisch.
But this actually takes work. It doesn't come by itself.
Weil die größte Schwelle ist dieses Schweigen und diese Gleichgültigkeit, diese Passivität zu überwinden.
Because the greatest threshold is to overcome this indifference, silence and passivity.
Und deswegen arbeiten wir an unterschiedlichen Ebenen.
And therefore we are working on different levels.
Manchmal sage ich das so, wir tragen in unserer DNA über die Tausende von Jahren der Kirchengeschichte den Antisemitismus in uns.
I sometimes put it this way, through the thousands of years of church history, we carry a DNA of anti-Semitism still within us.
Und wir haben jetzt die Gelegenheit, diese DNA zu überwinden, und da müssen wir erstmal ganz persönlich in uns hineinschauen, was wir da selber zu tun haben.
And I always say, now we have the opportunity and the chance to overcome this DNA. But in order to do that, we first need to take a look into ourselves, what we need to do about our hearts.
Wir müssen aber auch in unsere Theologie, unsere unterschiedlichen Denominationen hineinschauen, um auch dort den Antisemitismus und Judenhass zu überwinden.
But we also need to take a very careful look into our theologies and doctrine, what we need to do to find and actually to eliminate anti-Semitism in those doctrines.
Aber dann müssen wir lernen, dass unsere Solidarität zu Israel, unsere Liebe zu Israel nicht in den eigenen 4 Kirchenmauern bleiben darf.
And the next step we need to learn is that our love for Israel is something that cannot and must not remain within the 4 walls of our churches.
Sondern sie muss öffentlich sichtbar werden.
But it's something that needs to become visible publicly.
Und an diesem Schritt, da sind wir dabei, dass wir Kirchengemeinden auf die Straße rufen und sagen, kommt zu diesem Marsch des Lebens, überall, in jeder Stadt, in jeder Nation, wo ihr seid, anlässlich von Yom HaShoah, um ein Zeichen gegen Antisemitismus und der Freundschaft zu Israel zu setzen.
And this is the point where we challenge churches and denominations, come and take to the street on Yom HaShoah to make a public statement for Israel worldwide, no matter in which country you are.
Und was wir erleben ist, dass dieser Ruf inzwischen in Lateinamerika gehört wird, er wird in den Ländern Europas gehört, und wo wir kämpfen, ist, dass dieser Ruf sich ausweitet und zu einer gemeinsamen Stimme wird.
And what we are seeing is that this call is being heard, be it in South America, be it in other countries, in different nations worldwide. And what we are fighting for and what we are striving towards is to have a joint voice worldwide that is raised on behalf of Israel.
Und da geht es nicht einfach darum, sich nach hinten zu wenden zur Geschichte.
And this is not just about a turning back to history,
Sondern indem wir uns erinnern, sagen wir, wir wollen, dass so etwas nie wieder geschieht.
but by remembering, we declare something like this must never happen again.
Und wir wollen eine gemeinsame Stimme haben gegen den modernen Holocaust und alles, was sich gegen Israel erhebt.
And together we want to raise our voice against modern anti-Semitism and everything that stands against Israel.
Und das ist der Gedanke von dem Marsch des Lebens.
And that's the thought that is behind the March of
Eine
Life.
gemeinsame Stimme von Kirchen, Gemeinden, Denominationen, gemeinsam mit jüdischen Freunden.
To raise a joint voice of churches, denominations, together with Jewish friends,
Die unüberhörbar ist.
that will not be missed in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm going to ask one final question to each of our panelists. You'll have 3 minutes to respond, and then at the end, each one of you will have 30 seconds to give a final remark. And we're now in the wild card round, so it's getting a harder level of question too. All right, so Rabbi Dov Lipman, probably the most important issue to Jews and Christians today is the issue of the undivided capital of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city where both Jews and Christians parted ways over 2,000 years ago, and today we've returned back on that issue and started working together to promote it. Yet besides the Congress of the United States of America, almost every Western country is trying to divide Jerusalem. What can Jews and Christians do together to stand for United Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel?
I was in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol on Jerusalem Day, and member of Congress after member of Congress, Christians, got up and they said, we are here to stand for United Jerusalem, one after another after another. And we were there with members of Knesset from all the parties, and including parties that were more left-wing. And they almost felt forced into getting up when they spoke and saying, and of course we're also for a United Jerusalem, because how can the members of Congress be more dedicated to United Jerusalem than a member of Knesset? And as I watched this happen, I realized the power that comes from a strong community coming out and saying, we support a United Jerusalem. Those voices are not just voices that sort of wander out there. They are heard in Israel. Israel's under tremendous pressure from all sides. And sometimes you need that anchor to sort of remind you what it's all about. As the chairman of I'm a member of a center party called Yesh Atid, and the chairman of our party said, when we returned to Israel after 2,000 years, we didn't return to the towers of Azrieli in Tel Aviv, we returned to the Tower of David in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is not just a city, it's the heart and soul of the Jewish people. And for 2,000 years, including my grandmother 71 years ago in Auschwitz, when they finished their Passover Seder, they said next year in Jerusalem. And when they prayed, they looked to see where the sun was to turn towards Jerusalem. And we're not going to divide Jerusalem. And the message that I have whenever I travel around the world to two groups who want us to divide Jerusalem, I tell them that a divided Jerusalem means war, and a united Jerusalem means peace. And that's the voice that Christians all around the world who believe that with passion have to stand up and say, be heard over and over again. Pressure your members of parliament, pressure them. Use the power of your votes to pressure them not to be pressuring Israel on this issue, and to recognize that peace only comes through a united Jerusalem where all faiths have complete freedom of worship.
Thank you, Doug. Rabbi Soussan, we're seeing a scary rise of anti-Semitism here in Europe, not just in Germany, but in most of Western Europe. Something we haven't seen since the 1930s. We're seeing the same anti-Semitism, but today it's called anti-Zionism, but it's the same. It's the idea of the wandering Jew that doesn't have their own state, that take over in other people's places. The boycotts, don't buy from Jewish businesses, don't let professors who are Jewish speak in your universities. Now they're saying that about Israel. The blood libel, that they said we used Christian children to make matzah. Today they're saying we're giving poison candies to Palestinian children. it's something that we're seeing, and it's alarming in Israel. As someone who's on the ground with a large growing community, how can you prepare for this new wave of anti-Semitism? Are you telling people that maybe it's a time to consider make aliyah? Are you taking precautions to keep the community on the ground secure? What, as someone who lives with it on a daily basis, what are some of the methods that you're using to basically lead a community under these circumstances?
Yeah, actually, it's really difficult, mostly because I've strong relations to France. I grew up next to France, and I have a lot of friends there and family, and we see that things happened there already. Already 50 years ago, the chief rabbi of France told people there an issue we talked about here a year ago. Jews don't go on the street with a kippah, with the yarmulke, because it might be dangerous, and it still is, and we see that France is one of the countries in Europe who has the most immigrants nowadays to Israel, and we're very afraid that this, this fire of violent anti-Semitism is growing and coming, sweeping over into Germany, and on a daily basis we have very, very hard protected communities. We have schools where you can't enter without being known, not only from police but the inside security. We live here in a certain awareness of danger, and on the one hand you try to forget it because you have to lead a normal life. On the other hand, as I said, it's getting more and more dangerous, and especially because the Jews in Germany, they used to live on what we call gepackte Koffer, made suitcases. Only 10 years ago, one of the presidents of the Zentralrat wrote a book, and he said we unpacked them, and now it's time again, to have at least one somewhere in the house to be ready. It's strange. I don't know. There is a future, I guess, for Jews in Germany if the non-Jews in Germany let us be here. And the same is true for all over the world. I want not to end on a negative note, so let me answer a question asked to Rabbi Lipman. I wanted to tell you a short story, which is, I think, not really known. When the Crusaders came to Jerusalem, they killed the whole population, almost the whole population there, 5,000 Muslims and 5,000 Jews who lived in Jerusalem. And like almost 90 years later, when Saladin, I think, in Arabic, came there, and it was clear that he's gonna win. He's then in front of Jerusalem, and he was about to wipe out all the Christian crusaders. He got a letter from his personal advisor, who was also his doctor, his medical, and he said, "In the name of our common God." You know who he was? It's Maimonides, Rambam. Maimonides wrote a letter to Saladin and said, "In the name of our common God, please don't slay them. Let them go. Don't make the same mistakes they did. We try to be on a different level." I think that's something, and he did actually. Most of the Crusaders got off, went to Haifa, and went back to Europe. Only a few were enslaved, and that makes hope. I think that should be the message all over the centuries. There is hope if we really come together and use the common grounds. And of course, the Orthodox rabbis who signed this paper, they're not talking for all of us. There is now, just to tell you, there is in the RCA, the Rabbinic Council of America, they are working on such a note, and the same is true for the CER, the Council of European Rabbis. So soon we hope to have an answer that is speaking for the majority of Orthodox rabbis. Hopefully, we'll look for a better time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Harald, you work and run an organization that helps bring Jews back to the land of Israel through Aliyah in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, most notably in the book of Isaiah. At the same time that Jews have been exiting Europe, tens more Muslims have been coming into Europe, all over. through immigration policy, through the refugee crisis, and also through demographics by the fact that they have many more children than other European families. With all that being done, and we're seeing in Western Europe, in Brussels, in Holland, that Muslims will be the majority within 10, 20, 30 years, do you see a future for Christianity in Europe? Same question as for the rabbi.
Well, I think in a way we see we are facing the same challenges. Jews, Bible-believing Jews and Bible-believing Christians, to reduce it a little bit to that segment. But we are facing similar challenges, being from radical Muslim side, being from radical secular side, but it's similar challenges. So I think we should draw together closer and closer and support each other and help each other. And yes, I believe that certainly there is a responsibility. That is very clear. And Pastor Jobst Bittner has expressed that responsibility very powerfully, very clearly, and I'm in full agreement with him. And I think it depends a little bit how do we take on that responsibility. If we duck away from the challenges, the question is how much future do we have? But if we face the responsibility that we feel, and if we face the challenges that are before us with the help of God and under His wisdom and in His spirit, in His attitude, then I think, yes, we not only have a future, but we have a responsibility to change the future and to impact the future in a significant way. But after having answered that, let me make one more comment responding to your question concerning Jerusalem. Because that's something that's very much on my heart. And of course, Jerusalem, biblically, prophetically, and politically, in every respect, is the key factor in all the equation on every level, to me. We had a conference in Jerusalem about a year ago. We, as a number of Christian ministries and organizations from out of Europe, with about 400 participants from 40 different nations. A good one, it was exactly 70 years after the end of Holocaust. We started on January 27 with a prayer initiative in Auschwitz and in Krakow, and we finished in Jerusalem May 8, May 9. We will repeat something similar next year, and the point around which we meet is Yom Yerushalayim, which is Wednesday the 24th of May 2017. And so we built the conference around that date. We hope that many will come from many nations, Christians that love Israel and they're praying for Israel. And there is a thought in my mind, and I speak it out publicly because maybe it will have an effect. That I do believe what we could do as Christians is, together with many Israelis and many people from Jerusalem, we can do together a march of praise and a march of solidarity. Exactly 50 years after the reunification of Jerusalem on behalf of Jerusalem staying united under Jewish sovereignty. So that's one of the hopes I have, and maybe we can discuss it together and see if that could be something to be worked on.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to ask my final question to you about Jerusalem, since you're probably going to answer about Jerusalem anyways. You're working on a very ambitious project to bring tens of thousands of Christians to Israel, similar to the idea that Harald was speaking about now, but not for the 50th anniversary of Jerusalem, but the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel. Yet when we look at the statistics, only 1% of Bible-believing Christians have ever been to Israel. They say that out of the 600 million worldwide, only 6 million have actually been to Israel. Why aren't more Christians coming and seeing their faith come alive? And what can you do to engage the youth in order to get them involved in the miracle of Israel and Jerusalem?
Das ist natürlich eine sehr vielfältige Frage. Ich versuche an 2, 3 Punkten zu antworten.
Well, this is a very broad question. I'll try and limit my answer to 2 or 3 points.
Das eine ist, ich glaube, dass es eine große Hoffnung und eine große Hoffnung gibt für die Zukunft, die Jugend aus den Nationen nach Israel zu rufen.
I believe there is a great hope for the future, which is to mobilize the youth from the nations to come to Israel.
So, wenn wir heute uns mit Menschen beschäftigen, die sehr stark mit Israel innerlich engagiert sind,
And so when we have to deal with people today who are very much involved with Israel,
da sehen wir Menschen, die sehr stark aktiv sind, und das ist sehr ermutigend.
we see people who are really involved, really activated, and it's very encouraging.
Aber ich sehe eine Jugendbewegung, die anfängt, solidarisch mit Israel zu sein und die ein Zeichen für Israel setzen will.
But I also see a youth movement starting to rise who are also very involved and they want to be active and involved in Israel.
Und unsere Erfahrung ist, dass wenn Sie die Gelegenheit haben, die Geschichte Ihrer Väter und Großväter kennenzulernen und sie aus einer Betroffenheit heraus handeln, ist das eine andere Verantwortung, als wenn Sie einfach nur das aus irgendeiner anderen Motivation tun.
And it's been our experiences when these young people have the chance to get to know their own family stories, when they see the truth of how their families were involved, it actually creates a different level for responsibility and a different level of involvement.
So, und ich glaube, das ist ein Zeitpunkt, das ist jetzt speziell, weil du darauf diesen Zeitpunkt bezogen hast, jetzt 2018.
And I believe that this time that you mentioned, 2018, is a very special time.
So, das ist 70 Jahre nach der Staatengründung Israels.
Because it marks the 70th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel.
Und was passierte ist, dass vor 70 Jahren Holocaust-Überlebende Israel aufgebaut haben.
And what happened is that 70 years ago, it was Holocaust survivors who actually built and established the country.
Und das heißt, Israel ist aufgebaut worden auf ihren Schultern.
And so Israel was built on their shoulders.
Und der eigentliche Weg des Lebens da war, aus den Todeslagern heraus nach Israel, um dort einfach diese Nation aufzubauen.
And the true march of life, or path of life, was coming from the concentration camps into Israel to build the new state of Israel there.
So, das heißt, das Datum 2018 ist ein ganz wichtiges und entscheidendes.
And so the date 2018 is a very remarkable and very key date.
Und der Gedanke dahinter ist, was wäre, wenn die Menschen, die jungen Leute, die Generationen in den unterschiedlichen Nationen zu diesem Datum der Staatengründung, das ist im Mai 2018 nach Jerusalem und nach Israel kommen würde.
And so the idea behind it is to see what could happen if the youth of the different nations would come and all gather together in Israel on that date in May 2018.
Und mit ihnen zusammen, alle, die mit Israel identifiziert sind, ein gemeinsames Zeichen zu setzen.
With them, all those who are identified with Israel, and together make a statement for Israel in Israel.
Und wir fingen zuerst klein an zu denken und dann sprachen wir mit Politikern, mit Abgeordneten in Israel.
And at first we were thinking on a fairly small scale, but then we started talking to politicians and friends in Israel.
Und sie sagten, ihr denkt viel zu klein, wir glauben, dass Tausende und Zehntausende kommen werden.
And they told us, no, you're thinking much too small. We believe for thousands and tens of thousands.
Wie ein Marsch der Nationen ist,
That it will be a true march of the nations
in Jerusalem,
in Jerusalem
gemeinsam für Jerusalem und Israel ein Zeichen zu
to take
setzen.
a joint stand for Israel and to make a statement for Jerusalem and for
Und
Israel.
ich glaube, dass dieses Zeichen aus Israel übertragen werden kann in die Nation
And
hinein.
I believe that this statement for Israel can be actually broadcast back into the nations.
Und so sind wir gerade dabei, diesen Wunsch und diese Vision in uns zu tragen.
And so at the moment we are carrying this desire, this wish.
Und ich möchte noch was hinzufügen,
And I would like to add something.
weil die ganze Frage der Verantwortung, die wir haben.
Because the whole question of the responsibility that we were talking
Und dann
about,
möchte ich eine kleine Geschichte erzählen.
I would like to share a brief story.
Und zwar, wir hatten unseren letzten Marsch des Lebens an vielen, wir hatten einen in Tübingen.
We had our last marches of life in many different places, and one of them was in Tübingen.
Und wir sahen, wie 4, 5 Freunde aus dem Iran, die Flüchtlinge waren, an dem Marsch teilnahmen.
And we saw 4 or 5 of our Iranian friends. They were refugees from Iran, and they were also part of the march.
Und sie sagten, wir möchten gerne, wir wollen hier mit dabei sein.
And they came to us and they said, we want to be part of this.
Und in Iran, da haben wir Tod Israel geschrien.
Because in Iran, we went to the street and we would shout and scream death to Israel.
Aber wir haben hier etwas gelernt.
But now we have learned something
Wir
here.
sind in die Irre geführt worden.
We have been so deceived.
Wir haben gelernt etwas über Israel.
Now we have learned something about
Und wir
Israel.
möchten gemeinsam mit euch unterwegs sein, um zu sagen, dass wir jetzt mit Israel
And
zusammenstehen.
so we want to walk together with you publicly on the street to make a statement that we stand with Israel now.
So zur Ergänzung dieser Frage ist,
And just to add on that question,
ja, wir haben Verantwortung,
is yes, we do carry
aber
responsibility.
gleichzeitig gibt es große Zeichen der Hoffnung.
But at the same time, we see great signs of hope.
Und ich glaube, dass dahinter ist eine sehr, sehr große Kraft.
And I believe there is a great power and strength behind it.
Menschen zu rufen,
To call people
an der Seite Israels
to
zu stehen.
stand with Israel.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Please everyone give a warm round of applause for our panelists. It was a phenomenal panel. I was told that because we're in Germany, we have to stop on time. But I feel that we haven't finished this panel properly, so I'd like to volunteer Harald so that we can continue this panel next year, but this time in Jerusalem.